Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Herald podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes. To keep in touch with us, use our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, which are all at Q and Review. That's CUEANDREVIEW, or get in touch via information@qandreview.com. That's information@CUEANDREVIEW.com. Please like and share our podcasts and give us any constructive feedback.
The Herald, Wednesday the 26th of October 2022. News. Half of Scots struggling to afford energy and mortgage bills as price of cost of living crisis escalates. This article is by Martin Williams. Almost half of Scots are finding it difficult to afford their energy bills, rent or mortgage payments as the price of the cost of living crisis escalates, it has been revealed. The new survey carried out by the ONS and seen by the Herald shows that in the space of 3 months, 900,000 more Scots have been hit with bills concerns. Just 3 months ago, the same analysis from the ONS showed that less than 1 in 3 Scots were finding it hard to afford the bills. It comes as a separate survey has found that the price of budget food in supermarkets has risen by up to 65.2% in a year, as consumers look to cut the cost of their grocery bills in the cost of living crisis. New analysis has revealed that the price of 30 everyday low-priced items has typically risen by 17% over the 12 months to September, higher than the average rate of food and drink inflation running at 14.5%. The rate of budget food inflation has risen from 7% in the year to April. According to the new survey, some 210,000 Scots were behind in their energy bill payments in the 3 months to September this year, a rise of 50,000 over 3 months. Just under 106,000 are behind on their rent or mortgage. The analysis from the ONS's Opinions and Lifestyle Survey found between April and June that 39% of Scots found energy bills difficult to afford, while 25% were struggling with rents or mortgages. In the latest survey, some 46% were having trouble with their energy bills and 51% were finding rents and mortgages difficult to afford. Across the UK, the figures were higher in those living with disabilities, with more than half, 55%, finding it difficult to afford energy bills, and 36% struggling to cope with housing payments, that's their rent or mortgage. Last week, the Financial Conduct Authority estimated 7.8 million people, or 6 in 10 adults in the UK, were finding it hard to keep up with their bills. Around 1 in 15, 7% of disabled adults reported being behind on their energy bills, compared to 1 in 25, 4% of non-disabled people. 1 in 25, 4% of disabled adults reported being behind on their rent or mortgage payments. This was twice as high as their non-disabled counterparts, with 1 in 50, 2% behind on housing costs. Overall, 9 in 10, 93% of those surveyed reported their cost of living had increased compared with a year ago. A slightly lower percentage, 73%, said it had increased in the last month. A separate ONS study found that the prices of the cheapest vegetable oils and pasta in British supermarkets have soared by nearly 2/3 in the last year, the new data from the Office for National Statistics suggests. It comes as inflation is at a 40-year high, with prices up 10.1% in a year. Food prices drove the latest rise in living costs in September, along with energy bills and transport costs. Sue Davis, head of food policy at the consumer organisation Which, said the price of food is soaring, and our research shows that the cost of living crisis is leading to millions of people skipping meals or struggling to put healthy meals on the table. It is therefore essential that people get the support that they need from businesses as well as the government during this very difficult time. Supermarkets have a crucial role to play in supporting their customers through the difficult months ahead. They should ensure budget lines for affordable essential items are widely available across their stores so that people can easily compare the price of products to get the best value, and that promotions are targeted at supporting people most in need. The statisticians said the cost of the lowest priced vegetable oil had spiked 65%, and the cheapest pasta was now 60% more expensive than a year ago. The price of the cheapest tea had risen by 46%, chips were up 39%, bread rose by 38%, and biscuits were up 34%. While the recent spike in inflation began with energy prices, today's fresh insights using a new innovative data source show they are now filtering through to other important items, with the cheapest price of some staple food items rising by around 2/3 in the last year, National Statistician Sir Ian Diamond said. Figures from our near real-time survey of people show that while rises in food and energy costs are affecting many people across the country, those who are disabled, from certain ethnic minority backgrounds, and renters are among those struggling the most. With rises in the cost of living at the forefront of many people's minds, our new, almost real-time data showing just how prices are changing and shining a light on how different groups are affected have never been more important. The price of a 1,000 millilitre container of vegetable oil rose by 80 pence, 33%, and 1,500 grams of chips by 27 pence, that's 25%, in the 6 months to September alone. Some items did reduce in price. The largest price decrease recorded was fruit orange juice, which fell 9%. Beef mince also fell 7% in price. While announcing the data, the ONS cautioned that it had been produced using new innovative methods and as a result was less robust than official statistics. We are really seeing that the squeeze on people who buy the lowest cost things is pretty hard at the moment, said Mr. Diamond. I think things are tight. I think we are not seeing much of a getting worse at all, but we are seeing things remaining really tight. Last week it emerged that inflation in the UK had risen above 10% for the second time this year, as households came under pressure from the sharpest annual rise in food prices for more than 40 years. The Consumer Price Index rose to 10.1% in September, returning to double digits after a slight dip to 9.9% in August. The figure was last higher in 1982. Soaring prices for food and drink were the biggest driver behind the latest cost of living increase, with an annual rise of almost 15%, the fastest annual jump since April 1980, as the price of bread and cereals, meat, milk, cheese and eggs shot up. The September inflation figure is crucial as it is the one used to uprate pensions and benefits for the following April. Liz Truss promised before she stepped down as Prime Minister that the government would maintain the triple lock guarantee on pension increases, despite speculation that her Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, could break it in a push for budget savings. The Conservative Party manifesto commitment ensures state pensions rise each year in line with inflation, average wage growth or 2.5%, whichever is highest. This article is by Martin Williams.
From the Herald Scotland, Wednesday the 26th of October 2022, from the Voices section, Letter from America, the young African American who brought the fight against slavery to Scotland, by Ian Houston. The swaying seas of the Atlantic crossing tussled against a ship from America bound for Liverpool in 1893. On board was a courageous and early African American civil and human rights leader, Ida B. Wells. Off the journey, Wells recorded in her diary that she had become seasick for several days. She came to port weakened by the passage, but still a beacon of ardent strength. A woman's formidable voice equipped with a flame to light her path forward into Scotland. There she would tell gripping stories of the horrific treatment African Americans were facing in America. Her visit awakened the minds of thousands. Wales had a great mentor and supporter, African American leader Frederick Douglass, whose love and passion for Scotland ran deep. She brought letters of introduction from Douglass to various contacts he had developed in Scotland over the years, following his first visit in 1846. In some ways, he had passed the torch of reform to her. Wells' first stop was in Aberdeen on April 21st, 1893. There she was met by the fervent support of Scottish poet, novelist, suffragist and social reformer Isabella Fyvie Mayo. Fyvie Mayo's welcoming and enthusiastic spirit of support of Wells immediately set the tone of the historic visit. Wells was impressed with Fyvie Mayo's home and how she had made it a refuge and asylum for those from East India. Wells had also been grateful for how Fyvie Mayo, and Edinburgh-born and suffragist Catherine Impey, had found ways to sponsor her trip. The first public remarks Wells made in the UK were in the ballroom of the Aberdeen Music Hall. The speech almost did not happen, and the slot only opened up fortuitously because of Fyvie Mayo's advocacy. Wells was told before she started her remarks that she could only speak for several minutes. She moved to the podium, glanced out for a moment. The audience stared back, not knowing what to expect from the young African-American woman born in Bowling Farm in Mississippi. Then the words came, like the notes of the clarion trumpets that reverberated throughout the hall. Wells' remarks that day were some of the most compelling words ever heard in the music hall. She lost sight of the clock and ended up speaking for 25 minutes to an enraptured audience of Aberdonians. Wells denounced the racism she saw and experienced in America, addressed ballot box violence, spotlighted human atrocities, and described in graphic detail the barbarous practice of lynching that had spread considerably across the American South. Following Aberdeen, Wells went on to Huntly, Edinburgh and Glasgow, delivering equally powerful messages. She also spent time in England. An important piece of the remarks was to encourage the UK, as the largest importer of American cotton, to stand forthrightly against the disenfranchisement, segregation, and shocking practice of lynching. Many Scots and Britons had erroneously believed that nearly 30 years after the end of the American Civil War, that African Americans were being fully integrated into society. Some progress had occurred, but the dangers and violence were still appalling. Suffering was rampant, and African Americans were still unsafe. Wells used her gifts of persuasion to educate and change minds. The reach of her unflinching words stretched well beyond the physical structure she spoke in. During this Black History Month in the UK, I marvel at the life of Ida Wells and her seminal trip to Scotland 129 years ago. She took this gruelling and selfless journey to stand firm for the voiceless and powerless. The connections she made and minds she changed while in Scotland are without number. Wells spoke out knowing the personal risk to her, especially when she returned to America. It is people like Wells, Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King, and so many African Americans who stood tall for human progress in America and internationally as they spoke in cities across the UK. We are placed in this arc of time. We have a voice to address racism and discrimination, promote acceptance, create opportunities for those who have barriers placed in their path. Ida Wells said she felt a responsibility to show the world what African Americans were facing. We too have a charge. Wells, who died in 1931, overcame an ocean to change hearts. She was a ship's captain for change. I imagine she would say to us in our time, board your vessel, hoist the sail, stick the oars onto the water and depart the dock. A ship is best used when we take it out to sea, discovering the places that will shape us, rescuing and uplifting those we encounter and who are stranded along the way. By Ian Houston. Ian Houston has spent his career in Washington DC as an advocate for diplomacy, trade, global poverty alleviation, intercultural dialogue. He promotes commercial, educational and charitable linkages between Scotland and the US through Global Scot, Scottish Business Network, and as an honorary professor at the University of the West of Scotland and honorary lecturer at the University of Aberdeen. His views are his own.
The Herald, Wednesday the 26th of October 2022. News. £7 pint to be the norm amid soaring brewer costs. This article is by Brian Donnelly. A Scottish brewer has warned the £7 pint will be the norm rather than the exception in many places as the costs of some supplies rise 3,000% in a year. Alan Mahon, founder and chief executive of the purpose-driven brewer Brew Gooder, called on government and the public to support the struggling sector. One hospitality industry representative said the Scottish Government and Westminster should move to bring in support measures, adding, "We cannot allow the licensed trade to die." Mr. Mahon said the industry is being battered by spiralling production costs driven by the conflict in Ukraine, currency and duty challenges, and soaring inflation. This was made worse by the scrapping of a freeze on alcohol duty announced by Chancellor Jeremy Hunt earlier this month. Scottish wholesaler Dunn's Food and Drink said prices from brewers have gone up twice this year, and the Scottish Licensed Trade Association said everyone is suffering. Mr. Mahon said that despite the significant headwinds, the Glasgow-based brewer, whose customers include Morrisons, Asda and the Co-op, as well as on-trade customers such as the Gleneagles Hotel, would be continuing to honour all of its ongoing commitments to support good causes, with almost £100,000 set to be donated to its charity partners in 2022. The impact made will include support for food bank initiatives based in the UK and the funding of clean water projects in multiple countries worldwide via partner Charity Water. Mr. Mahon said the pub and brewing industry could find conditions tougher than during the COVID-19 lockdowns, but believes the industry must also seek to elevate the hospitality experience into something consumers cannot recreate at home. On the brewery side, raw material prices for the likes of wheat and barley are rising faster than the average rate of inflation, and consumers can perhaps understand that, said Mr. Mahon. What is less visible but equally as important is the things that don't often come to drinkers' mind when they're thinking of what goes into beer, such as the eye-watering explosion in carbon dioxide prices, which is 3,000% higher than 12 months ago, on top of soaring energy prices, a pain everyone is feeling right now. From what we are seeing, the pressures on the industry with cost price inflation challenges and the Chancellor's scrapping of the alcohol duty-frees might make a £7 pint the norm rather than the exception in many places, particularly in bigger cities. He said that it is vital the industry and brewers continue to work hard on ensuring that the pub environment is something that cannot simply be recreated at home, whether that be through beers only available in the pub or in encouraging people to socialise and meet friends for a drink or something to eat through various marketing or promotional platforms. He said it's important for the public and the government to recognise their efforts with support in the coming few months. Jim Rowan, Managing Director at Dunn's, which serves more than 4,000 hospitality customers across Scotland, said brewers predicted a further rise of at least 50 pence a pint before the end of the year. He said prices from brewers have gone up twice this year, so on average we expect a pint of lager to go up by as much as 50 pence per pint, premium beer by more. Pubs have been passing these increases on to the public, and so far the consumer has been understanding. Like all products, there is a glass ceiling which generally you can't go through. He said it used to be £5 per pint, now it's £6. £7 per pint in some cities is now in sight. Paul Watterson, spokesman for the SLTA, said we agree 100% with Alan Mahon. It's absolutely vital that both the Scottish and UK governments step in and take on board what we are saying. Yes, we have the traditionally busy festive period coming up and also the World Cup, which offer a glimmer of hope for hard-pressed businesses, but we already have evidence that some people are cancelling Christmas bookings. Business owners are worried, there's no doubt about it, and it's also the wider impact of the cost of living crisis on the general public, the people who use pubs and restaurants. While their costs go up at home, so too do the costs of producers and wholesalers. Everyone is suffering. We cannot allow the licensed trade to die. The battle is on to save it, because if we don't get help, there won't be a licensed trade. This article is by Brian Donnelly. The Herald, Friday the 28th of October 2022. News. NHS preparing for significant excess deaths this winter. This article is by Helen McCardle. Health chiefs are in talks with funeral directors to ensure cremations and burials can keep pace with demand in the event of significant excess deaths this winter. Board papers from NHS Lanarkshire also note that additional mortuary capacity created to help manage the COVID pandemic could be called upon to cope with a potential surge in mortality over the coming months. The document states the resilience planning officers of North and South Lanarkshire are working alongside local undertakers to ensure there is sufficient pace of funeral services, both burials and cremations, to support the eventuality of a significant excess of deaths over the winter period. Additional mortuary capacity identified for COVID is still in place and will continue to be available over the winter period. A spokesperson for the Health Board insisted that this was a routine part of winter resilience planning undertaken every year, but it comes amid fears that a resurgence of flu and COVID on top of the cost of living crisis could wreak havoc on an already buckling NHS. During the past 6 months alone, from mid-April to mid-October, the number of people dying in Scotland has been running 10% above average for the time of year. of the 2,828 excess deaths recorded, non-COVID illnesses such as heart attacks, strokes or dementia are responsible for more than half. Flu rates are currently low, but roughly twice what they would normally be for the time of year, with public health experts anticipating a much earlier surge in the virus following 2 successive winters where it virtually disappeared. Charities and researchers have also warned that the soaring costs of food and fuel could drive up mortality as vulnerable people cut back on meals and heating to save money. Suman Singh Gupta, Director of Health and Social Care for South Lanarkshire, said, "Every winter brings pressures on our health services with an increase in norovirus, colds and flu and other winter illnesses. This year may be even more challenging, having to deal with any potential increase in the number of COVID-19 cases." The Lanarkshire approach to winter planning involves all parts of our health and social care system, including GP surgeries, the primary care out-of-hours service, pharmacies, social care and acute hospitals. Each year, NHS Lanarkshire works with partner organisations, including the Scottish Ambulance Service, NHS 24 and North and South Lanarkshire councils to ensure all eventualities are planned for. As is the case every year, we are working closely with our local authorities to make sure there is sufficient mortuary and funeral provision in the event of unexpected increased deaths. It comes as a report revealed that last year saw Scotland record its third highest winter death toll since the century began. Between December 2021 and the end of March this year, there were 22,055 deaths from all causes. This was down from 23,370 during the first winter with COVID in 2020-2021 and 23,153 in 2017-18, an exceptionally high flu season. Otherwise, last winter saw the highest mortality since 1999/2000, when 23,379 deaths were registered. The report by National Records of Scotland notes that excess winter mortality last year was comparatively low, but only due to unusually high numbers of deaths from August to November 2021. Excess mortality in winter is calculated by comparing the total number of deaths from December to March against the average for the 4 months before and after winter. In 2021/22, there were 1,320 excess winter deaths compared to an average of around 2,600 for the past decade. However, this was skewed by the 21,679 deaths registered in August to November 2021, the highest number recorded during any autumn period since counting began in 1951/52. NRS said these were partly attributed to COVID-19. However, it also overlapped with the period where A&E performance began to steeply deteriorate, a problem closely associated with excess deaths. The most common causes of the 1,320 excess winter deaths last year were dementia and Alzheimer's disease, followed by cerebrovascular disease such as brain hemorrhages. COVID was the underlying cause of 60 of the 1,320 additional deaths, compared to 80 caused by pneumonia and 50 due to accidental falls. Julie Ramsey, Head of Vital Events Statistics at NRS, said, "The seasonal increase in mortality can change substantially from winter to winter, but the long-term trend has clearly been downward." In the 1950s and 60s, there was an average seasonal increase of over 5,200 deaths in winter. In recent weeks, the prevalence of COVID appears to have trickled upwards again in Scotland, with an estimated 1 in 35 infected by the first week in October. Professor Christina Pagel, a healthcare mathematician, said the current wave appears to be driven by waning immunity and increased mixing indoors, but that several newer Omicron subvariants, BQ.1, BQ1.1 and BF.7, made up 17% of sequenced cases in the UK by early October. She said at some point they will become dominant and likely drive a modest wave, but we're seeing these more immune-evasive variants hitting a more immune population as we're boosting. So it's not really clear how those two things are going to play off against each other. To date, 74% of over 65s and 85% of elderly care home residents in Scotland have received their winter COVID booster, though this dips to just 20% for social care workers. Uptake of the flu vaccine is also high among older adults at 70% for over 65s and 85% for elderly care home residents, but is just 13% so far among clinically vulnerable under 65s. This article is by Helen McCardle.
The Herald, the 28th of October, and the Voices section. New PM must act to save hospitality sector, by Donald MacLeod. This week, the revolving door of number 10 was again spinning at full pelt, with the ridiculed and incompetent Liz Truss exiting, a place taken by Rishi Sunak, the youngest Prime Minister in 200 years and the first Asian to become leader of the country. Despite having recently been rejected by party members, he becomes the UK's third Tory PM in less than 2 months, and the fifth to have been foisted on the British public in the past 6 years. The fastest turnover of leaders for nearly a century. It was a miraculous feat in regeneration, which I thought only Doctor Who could pull off. It seems the Tory party has its very own TARDIS, one which is able to regenerate and churn out a new leader every time the Tories are pummeled in the polls for making catastrophic errors in governance, which at the moment appears to be every other day. So are we again consigned to years of insufferable austerity or worse? Well, with Rishi, the robot's strong and stable hands on the tiller, maybe not. There is a small glimmer of hope that he may just be capable and clever enough to correct and reverse the catastrophic damage his party has inflicted on the nation and ease the worries before the Tories are eventually kicked out. His vital interventions during the pandemic were inspired. He should be given immense credit for introducing the coronavirus job retention scheme, the £70 billion furlough plan which saved millions of jobs and thousands of businesses. He should also be praised for his £800 million Eat Out to Help Out discount scheme, which boosted the fortunes of thousands of struggling restaurants and pubs during the summer of 2020 and saved many from going under. Timely financial interventions such as those are desperately needed again. I agree with Colin Wilkinson, CEO of the Scottish Licensed Trade Association, STLA, when he says, hopefully the appointment of Rishi Sunak will finally bring what we all need, a period of stable government to tackle all the challenges facing not just our sector, but in the country in general. The chaotic and self-destructive actions of the Westminster government over the last few months have been nothing but a comical farce, and nobody is laughing. We need stability, some certainty, and the right support to get us through the challenges we all face. Untold damage has already been inflicted on businesses directly caused by the Westminster government, which now must deliver on the needs of the UK and support these businesses facing the greatest threats, not just in the short term, but for the foreseeable future. As Chancellor, Mr Sunak recognised the importance of the hospitality industry during the pandemic and introduced measures to specifically help the sector. He must now continue that recognition as Prime Minister to address the threats of mass businesses closures, already one per hour over the last 3 months in the UK. The industry is united in calls for a reduction in VAT rates, further business rates relief, as well as complete review of business rates. These should be the top priority right now. The token support on wholesale energy prices is simply not good enough. A recent survey carried out by the SLTA showed that 87% of pubs and bars in Scotland urgently need government support to survive the winter. Action is needed now. Huge swathes of the population are finding it difficult to afford their energy bills, rent or mortgage payments as the cost of living crisis escalates. A cold winter of discontent looms ever nearer, threatening to further cripple the economy, and businesses from all sectors, particularly in the hospitality sector, will start to wither and die. There are many problems demanding the PM's immediate attention. I can only hope that his final throw of the dice in this last chance saloon finally pays off. That was by Donald MacLeod.
Herald Scotland recorded on Friday 28th of October 2022. Arts and Entertainments, Theatre, The Book of Mormon, Naughty, Outrageous and Such Great Songs by Brian Beacom, Senior Features Writer. At last, The Book of Mormon, thanks to COVID restrictions, has battled harder to descend into Glasgow than the current PM has to avoid accusations of undeniable dunstery. But at least the B of M, the worldwide hit show by South Park creators Matt Stone, Robert Lopez and Trey Parker, has won out. Yet, you may wonder who would wish to see a musical with a storyline which examines the beliefs and practices of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Mormonism, to most people, is the idea of young men in matching suits knocking gently on your door and not getting upset when the same door is slammed in their face. Mormonism is a Donnelly and Marie tithe-giving religion that is nice modern churches in Scotland populated by people who will tell you they love your outfit, even if the clothes you're wearing are the first thing that came to hand after that drug-hazed all-nighter. But does it offer a premise for a theatre musical? Well, its creators are masters of satire, and the show features a certain number of expletives and hard-hitting humour. Yet, of course, this show wouldn't have become so successful if it had simply taken a chainsaw to the head that is the Mormon belief system and buried it in a shallow grave. What the writers do cleverly is hold the religion's unusualness up for examination, the unrelenting geniality of its elders who walk the globe, chatting indoors and hoping to convert people with dauntless amiability. We grew up with Mormons, and their MO is to beat you by being kinder than you and higher than you, Parker explains. The storyline follows two Mormon salesmen, the highly strung Elder Price and dumpy lying Elder Cunningham, who are sent out to convert Uganda. And so we have a great narrative, a journey blocked by defiance, disbelief and dismay. How can you convert African villagers into believing that this American wealth machine can work in a world in which people are struggling to feed themselves? How can you knock on doors made of wattle? The writers make the most of this impossible task, and without giving too much away, we see Price and Cunningham sell their religion via cures for AIDS, which involves having sex with amphibians. Yes, honestly, it's naughty. It's at times outrageous. It has great songs, yet it doesn't mock God at all. Indeed, the 15 million Mormons in Utah are said to more or less support the idea of the show, in fact taking ad space in many show programmes. It reveals we're Christian, not a cult, said one leading elder who argues, brackets very gently, close brackets, the adage that there is no such thing as bad publicity. Wonderful. So we can all thank the God of all things theatrical that the Book of Mormon is now set to open in Glasgow. Now, let's pray for political deliverance. The Book of Mormon, the Theatre Royal, Glasgow, November 9 to 26. Don't miss Escape. Escape onto a paradise island and allow your mind to turn to blue surf in the wartime love story backed by Rodgers and Hammerstein music that is South Pacific Festival Theatre at Edinburgh, October 25 to 29. How can you not be intrigued by the wonderful line, "Welcome to the bunker, the apocalypse is now, and it's coming for you, bitch." This is the marketing pitch for The Time Machine, a radical feminist retelling. But will H.G. Wells be spinning in his grave? A group of feminists are contemplating impending doom, but asking if it's too late to turn things around. Meanwhile, a traveller lands in the year 802,701 to discover the fate of future humans and tries to unravel how it came to this. Wells wrote the 1895 classic in which a Victorian gentleman leaps ahead to find humanity has evolved into a two-tier society, with the privileged Eloi class on top and beneath the Morlocks doomed to subsist in the darkness. It was a prescient allegory. Now Melanie Jordan and Caitlin Skinner of feminist theatre company Jordan and Skinner have taken the tale and reset it in a story of women's battle for survival. H.G. Wells was trying to make a comment on capitalism, says Jordan. He was saying, look, everyone, if we keep going, we're going to have this division, and issuing a warning to his fellow early capitalists. He was responding to his current situation, and we're responding to ours. The Victorians were striving in the name of progress, which at the time was a very cool thing. Now we know industrial progress has burnt the planet. We need to change what progress means without dismissing everything that's happened already. Can a feminist utopian future emerge? Skinner adds, the characters are trying to balance their feelings of doom and despair with hope and agency and their ability to change things. It's more than likely that HG will be applauding both the sentiment and content of this hugely imaginative play featuring a cast of 4. The Tron Theatre, Glasgow, October 26 to 28, by Brian Beacom.
Hello, this is your reader Jackie, reading the Herald on Monday the 31st of October 2022. News. Ammonia emissions in Scotland have risen by 50% in just 5 years. This article is by Paul Dobson. Industrial emissions of ammonia, a pollutant which damages ecosystems and threatens human health, increased by more than 10% in Scotland last year, new data has revealed. New figures show that more than 11,000 tonnes of ammonia were released into Scotland's air and water in 2021, 1,000 tonnes more than in 2020. This is part of a longer-term trend which has seen reported ammonia emissions from industry, mainly agriculture, increase by over 50% since 2017. When ammonia is released into the air as a gas, it can mix with industrial and car fumes to create a form of air pollution linked to respiratory problems, heart disease and mental decline. One health expert told The Ferret that every effort must be made to control ammonia emissions for the sake of our health, our children's health and the health of our elderly. It has been estimated that thousands of deaths could be avoided in the UK each year if ammonia emissions from farms, the biggest producer of the pollution, were halved. Green groups also warned that ammonia was causing significant harm to Scotland's most important natural habitats and added this was leading to the loss of some important species. The figures, uncovered by independent investigative journalism cooperative The Ferret, come from the Scottish Environment Protection Agency's (SEPA) annual inventory of industrial pollution. The 925 tonnes of ammonia emitted to the air last year was the highest amount since 2012, while the 10,300 tonnes released into water was a 53% increase on levels reported 5 years ago. SEPA pointed out that the majority of the growth in ammonia emissions came from an increase in the amount deposited into water, particularly from wastewater treatment plants at Seafield in Edinburgh and Nigg in the Highlands. Scottish Water said the increase in reported ammonia discharges at Seafield and Nigg were caused by an improvement in monitoring from 2019 to 20. SEPA blamed the rise in ammonia emissions to air on production changes in the agricultural sector. Livestock farms were responsible for the vast majority of emissions to air in 2021. Ammonia is produced on farms through its use as a fertiliser and from animal waste. Ammonia pollution from farms can drift into urban areas and combine with other toxic pollutants to create a small particulate matter known as PM2.5, which is considered one of the most deadly air pollutants. Jill Belch, a professor of medicine at the University of Dundee, said that PM2.5s made from ammonia are really bad because they are so small they pass into the bloodstream where they spread to every organ in the body. She said ammonia gas is cleared very quickly from the atmosphere. However, the danger lies in its combination with emissions from fossil fuel-powered vehicles on nearby roads. PM2.5s have been linked to many serious diseases, from poor childhood cognition and poor lung growth to heart attacks, strokes and dementia. Every effort must be made to control these emissions for the sake of our health, our children's health and the health of our elderly. Ammonia pollution is also believed to be harming more than 60% of the UK's land area. It negatively affects biodiversity by causing nitrogen accumulation. Common and fast-growing species tend to be better adapted to nitrogen-rich environments and outcompete smaller, rarer and more sensitive species. The ammonia released to water was mostly reported by sewage and wastewater treatment plants like Seafield and Nigg. These two sites reported the biggest increases in their discharges of ammonia last year. But although these facilities report the pollution, its real source is households and industrial sites. SEPA documents cite breweries, food processing plants, and farms as sources of the ammonia pollution that ends up at wastewater treatment plants. The William Grant Whisky Distillery in Girvan was the only site with major ammonia emissions to water, which was not involved in wastewater treatment. It produced nearly 2,000 tonnes of ammonia last year. In water ecosystems, ammonia can build up in the organs and tissues of fish and other species, potentially causing them to die. Jenny Hawley, Policy Manager at Plant Life, which campaigns to protect the UK's wild plants, warned that the pollution can lead to species loss and lowered resilience to climate change, pests and disease. She added that in the worst cases, this could cause toxic damage to plants, lichen and fungi. Ammonia and other excess nitrogen in the air is causing significant harm to Scotland's most important natural habitats, from wildflower grasslands to temperate rainforest, Hawley told the Ferret. Sarah Ison, the head of research at Compassion in World Farming, said shifting away from intensive farming and allowing animals back onto the land would be the ideal scenario to reduce ammonia pollution. ISON said the largest ammonia emissions are from cattle, particularly dairy, and this can be reduced significantly by increasing the proportion of time cattle spend grazing. Housing animals, especially pigs, on straw that is regularly topped up to ensure it is fresh and clean, also helps contain ammonia. The National Farmers Union of Scotland's Resources Policy Manager, Sarah Cowie, said that the body was aware that ammonia emissions are an issue for the industry. She said, "We are taking steps to promote best practice in the use and storage of organic and inorganic fertilisers." With rising costs of fertiliser and a need for the industry to reduce emissions, we believe that more efficient use of fertiliser makes sense, not only for the environment but also for businesses. A spokesperson for SEPA said, "Our data for 2021 recorded an increase in ammonia emissions to water. This is largely due to 2 wastewater treatment plants. However, these sites discharge to the marine water environment where the discharge is highly diluted and the ammonia breaks down naturally." They said the increase in ammonia emission to air was likely due to production changes, such as increasing stock numbers and more free-range poultry. SEPA carries out inspections and provides clear guidance for farmers on management techniques to reduce the release of ammonia, the spokesperson added. Scottish Water said it saw no reason why more ammonia should have been discharged at Nig or Edinburgh in 2021, and that the increase was the result of an improvement in monitoring. Both sites were compliant with licensed discharge quality standards in 2021, the body noted. The William Grant Distillery did not respond to our request for comment. This article is by Paul Dobson. The Herald, Tuesday, the 1st of November 2022. News. Scots exports slump by 13% since Brexit. This article is by Martin Williams. Exports to the EU from Scotland have slumped by over £2.2 billion since Brexit. HM revenue and customs data seen by the Herald show that the value of Scotland's exports have slumped from £16.741 billion in 2019, the year before the UK exited the EU, to £14.528 billion in 2021, a drop of over 13% in 2 years. It reverses a trend that had seen Scotland's exports to EU countries rise by £420 million between 2018 and 2019. Scots businesses have raised concerns about continuing challenges in trading since the UK left the EU at the start of 2020 and has called on the UK government to act to make dealing with Europe easier. The slump has been supported by a £3 billion drop in Scotland's most exported goods, mineral fuel, mainly oil and gas, with sales dropping from £9.139 billion to £6.246 billion. According to Offshore Energies UK, oil and gas activity supports 90,000 jobs in Scotland, some 42% of the total UK workforce. According to the analysis, exports of food and live animals also dropped by £67 million to £1.099 billion. But there were some gains, with machinery and transport exports rising by £416 million from £1.88 billion to £2.297 billion. Separate, more Scottish Government analysis found that petroleum products and related materials fell by £826 million, that's 41%, to £1.4 billion to the EU in the year between the first 3 months of 2020 and the same period of 2021. Shellfish exports to the EU fell by £33 million, or just over a fifth, over the same period. Beverage exports, mainly whisky, fell from £858 million to £833 million by £25 million, or 3%. Most of the fall came from a £23 million, or 9% decrease in exports to the EU. Medical and pharmaceutical product exports to the EU fell 34%, or £38 million, while exports to the rest of the world rose by 21%, or £15 million. Office machines and advanced data processing machines saw £29 million, 50% drop in exports, with most of this fall, £26 million, related to the EU. Dr. Liz Cameron, Chief Executive of the Scottish Chambers of Commerce, said, "Scottish exporters are telling us that they continue to face growing challenges trading with countries in the EU post-Brexit. New customs procedures, tariffs, regulatory barriers and transport disruption are consistently cited as the top challenges facing firms. Faster customs processes, tariff reductions, removing technical barriers to trade, focused support for small and medium-sized enterprises, easier labour mobility, and mutual recognition of professional qualifications are top priorities for Scottish exporters. Businesses have been through enormous challenges over the last 2 years, but they have shown incredible resilience. During times of economic uncertainty, having a presence in a number of markets is an effective way to minimise risk. So we need to ensure that Scottish businesses are also encouraged to keep looking for international trade opportunities. To support this, the UK Government must ensure trading internationally is made easier for Scottish exporters, for example, by creating resource hubs which can better guide businesses to particular areas and regions of interest. It earlier emerged that Scotland had increased its resilience on exporting to the rest of the UK, leading to unionist warnings about the risks of independence. The proportion of Scottish exports going to the rest of the UK in 2019 increased from 59.4% to 59.8%. But international exports fell as a proportion of the total from 40.6% to 40.2%, and within these, exports to the EU fell from 19.1% of all exports to 18.8%. The SNP always cites the size of the overall European market as an argument in favour of leaving the UK and rejoining the EU. But while the EU may be 7 times the size of the UK market in theory, in practice the UK has been the destination for 3 times as many Scottish exports as the EU. In 2019, exports to the EU increased due to a 33.9% jump in information and communication, £140 million, 25% in transportation and storage, £185 million, and 32.1% in pharmaceutical products. Petroleum and chemical products remained the biggest proportion of exports to the continent, with the EU buying £3.2 billion from the sector, but the figure dropped by £200 million based on the previous year. Meanwhile, UK-wide analysis reveals post-Brexit drops in export sales of £26 billion have been being registered with the top 4 biggest economies in the EU. Sales to Germany have dropped from £56.345 billion in 2019 to £47.285 billion, while the value of exports to France has slumped from £40.285 billion to £32.289 billion, according to the UK Government's Office for National Statistics, ONS. Sales to Italy dropped by £3.5 billion to £14.245 billion, while exports to Spain dropped from £19.391 billion to £13.216 billion. Since the end of the Brexit transition period on December the 30th, 2020, non-EU imports have surpassed EU imports into the UK. Non-EU imports rose sharply by 13% in August alone. It was the highest level of imports from non-EU countries since records started in January 1997 and has been put down to high gas prices. A Scottish Enterprise spokesperson said, "Exporting remains vital for Scotland's economy, and through our network of offices we are working hard to help companies realise their export potential and tap into new markets around the world." Recent years have been challenging for a variety of reasons. However, our intelligence suggests Scottish companies expect to see export levels increase during 2022-23, with greater interest in new markets, predominantly in Asia and the Americas. It comes as ministers have been warned that UK government red tape could lead to a block to meat exports that will have a devastating effect on the Scots industry and raise prices. Scots farmers and meat producers are among those objecting to regulatory changes due to come in from December the 13th that will mean that a significant amount of meat production will become non-compliant for export to the EU overnight. With 72% of all meat exports going to the EU, the UK government has been warned that it will have a devastating effect on farmers, auction markets and meat processors. The National Farmers Union of Scotland, NFUS, and Scottish Association of Meat Wholesalers, SAMW, have both put their names to concerns sent to the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA, that the new rules will be another shot in the foot for the economy, with big unintended consequences for farmers, processors and consumers alike. The issue surrounds pre-export requirements, which are set to change from a farmer declaration to a veterinary attestation with immediate effect on December the 13th under a new DEFRA animal health documentation policy. A Scottish Government spokesperson said, "These latest figures show that while the economy is recovering, Scotland is still feeling the ongoing combined negative impacts of Brexit and the pandemic on trade." Scottish Government analysis showed that Scotland's trade in goods with the EU was 12% lower in 2021 because of Brexit, which has taken us out of the world's biggest single market, which is around 7 times bigger than the UK. The Scottish Government is committed to Scotland rejoining the EU as an independent country. This article is by Martin Williams.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 31st of October 2022, from the Voices section, Doug Marr, no wonder teachers are wary of school trips. Teachers everywhere will have breathed a sigh of relief on behalf of 3 colleagues recently acquitted in a French court of a charge equivalent to manslaughter. In 2015, the teachers from a school in the Hull area had led a party of 24 youngsters on an activity trip to Limoges in France. The party had enjoyed hiking and canoeing before tragedy struck during a swim in a local lake. A floating platform overturned, trapping a 12-year-old who later died in hospital. At their trial, 7 years later, prosecutors demanded 3-year prison sentences for all 3. Prosecutors argued the tragedy was down to their lack of surveillance. The judge took a different line, pointing out there was no apparent reason for the platform capsizing, there was a lifeguard on duty, and the green flag was flying. The parents were understandably distraught. I handed over my parental responsibilities to other people. They were told children would be supervised at all times. Like many present and former teachers, my reaction was, there but for the grace of God. Throughout my career I organised many similar trips. They were a mixture of modest local residentials and adventures to more distant places. We were aware of our responsibilities and tried to plan accordingly, but in the 1970s and early 80s, there were fewer concerns about safety and litigation. Why did we do it? Cynics who rarely budged from the darker recesses of the staff room probably opined, there they go, organising another freebie. Anyone who's ever done so will confirm it's far from a holiday. Most teachers who organise and lead trips believe in their education and socialisation value. Teachers and pupils see one another in a different light, and there are spin-offs back in the classroom. Trips are especially valuable for youngsters who, for financial or other reasons, are unlikely to have the experience. Many party leaders will go out of their way to ensure cost doesn't rule out pupils who would benefit. There's a great deal of satisfaction if all goes well. Nearly 40 years on, I occasionally bump into former pupils of an inner city school who were part of our 1970s Aberdeen to Athens odyssey. Often that trip is one of the first things they want to talk about, their first flight and the negotiation with an Acropolis gatekeeper as to why 80 of us should be allowed to enter, even though I'd left the group permit at the hotel. As I recall it, Aberdeen, Scotland did the trick. Then there was the inquiry of a taverna owner whether we could bring children into his Greek night. No problem, children very welcome. How many? Understandably, he was astonished to learn a female colleague and I had 80 children. Diplomacy can be required. One afternoon we took the youngsters to the beach. Within minutes, a group of senior girls approached with a tricky request. Mr. Marr, can we go topless? Answer to that one in a postcard, please. There can be the occasional heart-stopping moment. I'll never forget counting a large group of a ferry at Dover and discovering we were one short. A search of the ship found him asleep in a toilet, but it did prompt the question, why did I do this? I fully understand why present-day teachers might be reluctant to place themselves in situations where they could be held culpable, possibly criminally, for anything going wrong. When I was organising trips, the safety and legal climates were very different and yes, slacker. That's not to say modern standards are wrong, but there are huge disincentive for teachers wishing to broaden youngsters' experiences and horizons. Teachers are also poorer for not having worked and lived with their pupils in different surroundings. The private sector has never lost sight of the value of out-of-school and out-of-hours learning. The experiences of the already privileged are therefore enhanced even further. Trips and other out-of-school activities do continue, but in a more limited and constrictive form. It's a great shame. As one former pupil, now in her 50s, reflected, about the only thing I remember from school are the trips. Says it all, really. And that was a comment piece by Doug Marr. From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 31st of October 2022, from the Voices section, Leslie Riddick, the community is being let down by the Land Reform Bill, by Leslie Riddick, columnist. What do these tiny rural communities have in common? All are potentially being sold to the highest bidder of the head of local communities, already fragile and unnaturally small thanks to centuries of private, absentee and quango ownership. And it's not at all clear the new Land Reform Bill will fix things. Happily, the Scottish Government has stepped in at the 11th hour to stop Nature Scott selling Kinloch Castle to Jeremy Hosking without community involvement. But if the quango still wants to sell, who'd be the community rep tasked with negotiating safeguards from the millionaire who's donated to parties led by Nigel Farage and Lawrence Fox? Why has the community been placed at such a weak position by a community supporting Scottish Government quango? Meanwhile, Tay Village Station in Argyll is in the market for £10.4 million, quite beyond the means of the local community, which is bidding for 2 of the 13 lots and developing village land donated by current owners. The community's aim is to provide a clear out of tenants if new owners eye bigger bucks to be made from tree planting and carbon offsetting. Half of all long-term lets locally are owned by the estate, so if 13 new absentee owners order a clear fell of locals, there's nowhere else to go. Indeed, such is the incredible escalation of land prices, few communities will ever be able to muster the cash for buyouts again on land suitable for mass tree planting. Consider, 30 years ago, £2 million they bought the St Crofters land in the island of Egg. But the average estate has leapt 87% in value between 2020 and 2021 alone. Soaring land prices have exposed the weakness of expecting community buyouts alone to create the most concentrated, unregulated and permanently overheated land market in the developed world, without implementing land taxes and effective planning control. Now that substantial heat has been further stoked, albeit inadvertently, by the net zero strategies of both the Scottish and UK governments. First came cash for onshore wind farms. Now comes mass tree planting, great for Scotland and the planet, but not so good for rural communities and more diverse land ownership. Every large company wants to be carbon neutral, since a measurable journey towards net zero is specified in some government contracts and factored into the long-term bank lending and preferences of green consumers and eco-conscious millennial staff. Again, this is all good, in principle. But companies will need to offset the carbon they can't eliminate from their own processes, and that's where carbon offsetting comes in, with landowners selling carbon credits for forests they've registered and validated under the UK Woodland or Peatland Carbon Codes. Yet, if carbon offsetting sounds like a problem for the likes of Amazon, in some very different universe, think again. The UK government's streamlined energy and carbon reporting, SECR, urges every company to have net zero plans by 2025. Presumably that helped motivate Forestry and Land Scotland, the old government-owned Forest Commission Scotland, to become the first public body to buy an upland estate for the laudable purpose of restoring peatlands and expanding native woodland in Glenprosson. Grand. The Angus estate had been owned by investor Robert Batchelor, but the 16,500 acre sporting estate will change hands at the end of November. There's a £25 million asking price though the sale price is expected to be near £15 million. Now, apart from the Scottish Government paying over the odds to rocketing land price inflation driven by their own laudable drives for reforestation and net zero, and the small problem that this has been an off-market secret sale of the kind the Scottish Government is trying to outlaw, since it precludes rival bids from local farmers and communities. What's so wrong with it? Just the small matter that 5 local tenants have lost their jobs and possibly their homes too. One has already left, one is leaving, and whilst the others, I understand, have the possibility of extending their tenancies, without jobs or land, where would they stay? And how is this any different from the criticism of the Duke of Buccleuch had received after long-standing tenant farmers said they were being forced off the land to plant trees for which there can be generous government grants? True, the numbers involved in Glenprosson are pitifully few, except it's happening across Scotland, off-market, small-scale and apparently for the greater good. Yet also the tin lid for many rural, landless communities which have been struggling to survive for decades. How is this okay? And how does any of it get resolved through the mechanism of community buyouts, which are now far beyond financial and practical means of tiny, laird-dependent communities? Undoubtedly, it seems hard to promote rural sustainability, net zero and reforestation at the same time, in Scotland. Yet one laudable objective shouldn't be allowed to trump the others. 432 people own half the private land of Scotland, but 100,000 people, members of the Metsalito cooperative, own half of the private forests of Finland. Trees and people go together everywhere else except Scotland, where land is unaffordable to all but investors, so that people-free blanket forestry looks like the only game in town. Just as blanket deer forests and sheep parks appeared in the centuries past. Will the new land reform bill remedy this? Probably not. If land has spiraled beyond ordinary reach, then preemption and prior notification are meaningless. Rural communities help keep Scotland sustainable. Why is that obvious reality so hard to grasp? And that was a comment piece by Leslie Riddock.
From The National, Tuesday the 1st of November 2022, from the sports section. Andy Murray beaten by Gilles Simon in the first round of the Paris Masters. Andy Murray was stunned by Gilles Simon in the first round of the Paris Masters. The Scot had the upper hand to begin the evening and looked poised for a straightforward victory after taking the opening set. But Frenchman Simon staged a comeback, rallying back from a 5-3 deficit and winning 4 games in a row to claim the second. And veteran Simon, who is set to retire after this tournament, took the final set to keep his career alive for at least one more match, winning 4-6, 7-5, 6-3. Murray broke Simon's serve in the second game before finding himself down 40-love in game 3. He soon regrouped, spinning a sideline hugging forehand and saving 3 break points to extend his advantage. Simon cut the deficit, holding Murray to love to make it 4-2, but the Scot replied in kind as the Frenchman was unable to post any points in game 7. It was 5-3 when Murray began to rattle in front of the vocal home crowd, double faulting for the first time in the set to open the game for Simon, who took full advantage and banked his first break of the match. Simon fended off the first set point with a smash and tried the same shot to stave off the second, but overpowered it to hand Murray the set and another break. Murray was visibly frustrated, hitting his racket on the ground when, all things square at 1-1, his forehand hit the net. Again, Simon capitalised on the mistake to break the Scots' serve, but Murray got the break back immediately to level the set before pulling ahead. And it was Murray who had the upper hand at the end of a 24-shot rally, first with an over-the-shoulder shot and then a well-placed forehand flick from the baseline, though the Frenchman ultimately levelled things at 3 games apiece. Murray won the next and earned a critical break point to make it 5-3 before Simon broke back. The momentum began to swing in the Frenchman's favour, Simon making it 5-5 and going on a 10-point unanswered run en route to breaking Murray for their 4th time, then quickly clinching the set to the roar of the Parisian crowd. Those fans seemed to start getting under Murray's skin as Simon earned the first break of the final set to make it 2-1, and what had once looked like a potential straight sets for Murray evolved into a dogged battle. And by the end, for just the 3rd time in 19 meetings, Simon prevailed and will play on in front of an elated home crowd, at least once more.
The Herald, the 1st of November, and the Arts and Ents section. Ian Jack, outstanding journalist who, in taut and evocative prose, recalled Britain's past, by Alan Taylor. Born 7 February 7, 1945, died 28 October 2022. By his own account, Ian Jack, who died aged 77 after a short illness, was a citizen of that borderless mythical country known as the past. Throughout his long and distinguished career in journalism, he frequently returned to it, as Glaswegians used to trek to Saltcoats or Largs. It was Winston Churchill who cast a long shadow over the formative years of Jack and his contemporaries, who supposedly said that the Balkans produces more history than it can consume. Jack felt much the same about Britain, in which he grew up and lived. Not without reason did he title one of his too few books The Country Formerly Known as Great Britain. His subject, if such a varied body of work can be so telescoped, was a decline of this place, exemplified for him in the neglect of the railway system and the decimation of the shipbuilding industry. Devotees of his journalism knew that sooner rather than later Jack would get round to introducing boats and trains into whatever story he was writing. Indeed, one of the last pieces he wrote was a 17,000-word essay for the London Review of Books, in which he described in pellucid detail the Calmac ferry debacle. But it was much more than that, encompassing a history of shipbuilding on the Clyde and Jack's own family involvement in it, and of a Scotland that had evaporated in his lifetime. Lipton's the Grocers, the Scottish Cooperative Wholesale Society, North British Loco, Kellier's Marmalade, the Great North of Scotland Railway, the Dunfermline Linen Warehouse, where are they now? What was it like before? Was a question that Jack acknowledged he may have been too fond of asking. A typical piece would start with a news peg, a Hatfield train crash, the Titanic movie, or Celtic playing in the UEFA Cup final in Seville, and develop into a threnody of an age when things were greyer, simpler, and less meretricious. Jack's preferred tense was the past, and he was exercised by fellow hacks who resorted to the present. If he was nostalgic, which he surely was, he was self-consciously so. His prose, which was the equal of that of George Orwell, James Cameron, and Joseph Mitchell, was fact-centred, never flowery, always taut. He was a reporter who preferred to rove and seemed never happier than when visiting once thriving towns that were now down on their luck. Writing in 2006 about Dunfermline, for instance, where he had been schooled, he despaired for what it had formerly been, and for the loss of Scott's Electricals, where he had his first heard the Everly Brothers, and Macpherson's The Bookshop, where he bought for £1 a leather-bound copy of Rupert Brooke's poems. What had contributed to the town's downward spiral, he concluded, was not the closure of an industry or a dockyard or the exhaustion of a mine. What ended it wasn't poverty, but rootless wealth. Ian Jack was born in 1945 in Lancashire. His father, Henry, who was born in Lowland Scotland, was a steam mechanic, or fitter, as he preferred to be called. His mother, Isa, of Irish extraction, had worked in a linen mill before her marriage. The family, who had moved south in search of work, returned north in 1952 and settled in North Queensferry, virtually within touching distance of the Forth railway bridge. Jack was one of 4 boys, 2 of whom died at a young age. In one of his finest essays, finished with engines, he wrote of how as a boy he was obsessed with death and was sure that he too would not live for long. At primary school, he was bullied for having buck teeth, of which he was eventually cured. Some people may remember the early 50s for the Korean War or the coronation or the first erratic flights of the comet, but I remember them for a triumph of dental science and receding teeth. His family, particularly his father, he recalled, was redolent of the past. I sensed that my father was at odds with his surroundings, he wrote, that something had gone wrong with his life, and hence our lives, and that I had been born too late to share a golden age, where the steam engine drove us forward and a watchful God still held the helm. Despite his obsession with oily trades, his first thought was to become a librarian. But this was shelved in favour of journalism, progressing from local papers to nationals, including the Glasgow Herald, where he started as a trainee journalist in 1965, and the Scottish Daily Express. In 1970, he moved to London, where, hired by Harold Evans, he joined the Sunday Times. Andrew Neil, Evans' successor as editor, described him thus: Jack was the most talented feature writer on the paper, a Scottish socialist whose left-wing views were tempered by a healthy scepticism for metropolitan political fashion. His beard and scruffy dress made him look like an ageing hippie, and he was shambolic when it came to organising anything. He was not a most productive writer and seemed to disappear for months. For years he had supposedly been writing a book on Indian trains. I don't think it ever materialised. When he did concentrate his mind on journalism, however, he wrote like a dream. Much to Neil's chagrin, Jack left to the Sunday Times in the aftermath of the Wapping dispute. He later joined the newly formed Independent on Sunday, where he edited from 1991 to 1995. Thereafter, he edited the literary magazine Granta from 1995 to 2007. As an editor, he was loyal, supportive, kind and intuitive. Others of his books are Before the Oil Ran Out, 1987, and Mofussil Junction, 2013. Never having attended university, he hadn't an autodidact's love of knowledge and shared it generously. He had an autodidact's love of knowledge and shared it generously. For the past 15 years, he wrote a column for The Guardian, including one about the legendary Polish reporter Ryszard Kapuscinski, who stood accused of blurring the line between fact and fiction. An admirer of Kapuscinski, he was inclined to be sympathetic, but ultimately felt that if a book is labelled reportage, it ought to be true to that word. That was Ian Jack in a nutshell. Catherine Viner, the editor of The Guardian, said Ian Jack was one of the finest journalists of his generation. He was an incredible reporter, full of curiosity and observational skill, and he was also a wonderful writer. Our readers loved him. There was no one like him. Andrew Marr, former editor of The Independent, described him was one of the great wise originals of British journalism. Ian Jack was twice married, first to Aparna Bagchi, 1979 to 1992. In 1998 he married Lindy Sharp, with whom he had 2 children, Isabella and Alexander. He is survived by all 3, along with his elder brother Harry. He fell ill in Rothesay and was taken to hospital in Paisley, where he died. That was by Alan Taylor.
And that was this week's The Herald podcast, normally recorded in our studio at the Bishopbriggs Media Centre, currently recorded from our volunteers' homes with the publisher's kind permission. Thanks for listening.